Good morning, Malta and Gozo, and welcome to another edition of Lovin Daily. I'm your host, Chris Perugine, together with Tim Diacono today. How was your weekend, Tim?
Pretty good.
Yeah?
How was yours?
Good, thanks. I'll just run through the headlines of today and then we'll start to discuss the story. So, Malta has hit a record 396 active COVID cases. The Education Minister has floated the idea of class bubbles as Maltese schools get set to reopen next month. Bernard Grech, the candidate for opposition leader, says his opinions on divorce have changed since 2011. A young Maltese man is still waiting for an operation 5 days after breaking his arm. We'll talk a bit about some of the pressures the hospitals are facing. And Malta enters its final stage for a bid to host Europe's largest gay pride event. Tim, let's start with the situation on COVID.
Yes, so over the weekend, yesterday specifically, Malta hit 396 active COVID-19 cases, which is a record since the start of the pandemic. So during at the peak of the first wave, or what I would like to call it, we were at around 350 maximum. Now we're at 396. The latest 54 cases were confirmed yesterday, slightly offset by 9 new recoveries. The situation is obviously much different though than what it was when we were at around 250 cases. Back then, we're in quasi-lockdown mode. All businesses were shut down, the airport was closed, people were asked to stay at home. Now it's not the case at all. Like, the streets are packed. A lot of people don't seem to mind congregating in public. There are some new laws, but there's a lot of question marks about who's enforcing them and whether they're strong enough and whether they're detailed enough. The doctors are still striking. So the government does seem to have, really embarked on a different strategy. It actually seems more like how Sweden had approached the situation at the start, rather than how mainland Europe or most European countries had.
It's interesting to note as well that New Zealand has now entered its 100th day of no COVID cases. They've taken a very different strategy to Malta, especially in terms of tourism and mass events. It must be said, mass events in Malta have now been restricted to the numbers of a maximum of 100 people for indoor events and 300 people for outdoor events. And the situation in hospitals, Tim, I believe there are about 15 people who are hospitalized,
There are
right?
15 people who are, as of Friday, so the new hospital figures somehow aren't published every day, but as of Friday, there were 15 people spread across different hospitals. Now, it's important to note that these aren't all people who require hospital treatment per se, but they also include people who are being kept, COVID-19 patients, or being kept in a hospital setting purely to prevent them from infecting household members. Either they might live with a vulnerable person, or they will live in a cramped household in which they cannot isolate by themselves. So these 15 people include people like that. So in terms of a medical situation, we're still extremely good. There's just a couple of people who require medical care. No one requires intensive care. And I think it is important to put that into, to take that into account, like just to keep the entire situation in context. Sometimes you hear 54 new cases and you get images of everyone flooding the hospital. This is not the case at all.
We'll wait to see what the numbers look like today. In the meantime, we'll move on to our next story. So Education Minister Owen Bonnici has floated this idea of class bubbles, and that's not a reference to, it's not an elitist thing. It's about having children in classrooms stick together during the school day. So the idea is for them to arrive at school at certain times together, for their breaks to be split throughout the day so that the class can go on break together and not mix in the playground with everyone else. So still quite a restrictive environment, but it would allow schools to reopen in a sort of safe way. There are countries like Denmark and Northern Ireland who are doing this. It does beg the question, what happens with school transport? I think that's a big question that parents must be asking, and I think in general parents must be very, very concerned about when schools are going to start. Obviously we know that the economy is quite dependent on schools being able to reopen so that parents can start working normally again. A lot of parents have struggled with going back to work while their kids are not in schools. What do you make of this, Tim? Do you expect schools to reopen?
I have absolutely no idea, Chris. But what I do know is that the opening of schools is crucial, and not only from an economic standpoint, it's also crucial for the children themselves. So, especially primary students, some find it very difficult to learn online, especially the younger you are. But not only that, there's also a social aspect to schools as well. You know, if you're particularly an only child, that's the only social interaction you will get all day with people your age is at schools. And denying children this opportunity during a very crucial period of their development is something that definitely needs to be taken into account when deciding whether or not to open schools. Obviously, this is coming at a time when numbers are on the rise. The problem is that children, especially the younger children, will probably find it very difficult to obey things like social distancing or mask wearing and even hand sanitization. So
it must be said as well that while class bubbles will be manageable for primary school students, it becomes a bit more difficult for secondary and for sixth form and universities, where students have to mix between different classrooms and different subjects.
But then again, that can also be countered by the fact that they will probably understand things like social distancing even more, and they can probably adjust to online learning even more as well.
And also, as well, sixth forms and universities are expecting record numbers this year because of the exam situation. A lot of students have automatically graduated to university and sixth form before their exams are done. Let's move on to the next story, Tim.
Yes. So Bernard Grech, one of the two people contesting the leadership election for the Nationalist Party, has said his opinion on divorce has changed over the years. So Bernard Grech is a political outsider who has, stormed to the top of opinion polls over the past few days. However, he did have a brief stint in the Maltese public eye around 9 years ago, when he was involved in the anti-divorce campaign ahead of a referendum to legalize divorce, which ultimately passed. Now, Bernard Grech had campaigned against divorce back then. Some of his arguments included things that, I want to give children hope that one day the separated parents will unite together and divorce ends that completely, which I don't know, it sounds a bit of a facile argument, especially nowadays. However, he said that over the years his opinion has changed, both from a legal perspective, as he saw how the law is actually working, and from a personal perspective as well. I mean, look, some people are saying that this is an example of a youth and someone with no values, someone who's just willing to just change his principles. I disagree. I think it's acceptable. I think politicians should be willing to change their opinions when new facts emerge. And I don't think it's a sign of weakness. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's in some ways you could criticize it as being similar to those lawyers who were against the passport scheme and then started selling it and found it was okay, as in when he started doing divorce cases. But I think actually there is a sign of maturity here. I think a lot of people who were against divorce before its introduction have changed their minds as the years went by. And I think what counts now is to see how someone like Bernard Grech will tackle similar issues in the future. And obviously issues like abortion come to mind, which is likely to become a hot political issue over the next few years. So we'll see how he tackles these issues as well. Interestingly as well, Bernard Grech said this in an interview with Malta Independent, and the rules of this PN contest are such that he cannot give interviews. So in fact, he's not giving
He
any more interviews until the due diligence process is complete. Meanwhile, Adrian Delia, I guess, doesn't have such restrictions because he's still opposition leader and PN leader. Just this weekend he turned 51 and he took to Facebook to ask God for guidance on his next step. I saw that as a bit of an interesting one, wondering whether he's reconsidering his move. But we'll move on to the next story. A young Maltese man is still awaiting an operation 5 or 6 days today after breaking his arm. So this might sound like a small story at first, but it's quite interesting to understand the realities of it. So there's a 21-year-old man, he broke his arm, and he's been in hospital awaiting surgery. But every day he fasts from 11 p.m. to 4 p.m. He takes lots of painkillers, he prepares himself for this operation, and then this operation gets postponed. Happened once, twice, 3 times. And it's not quite clear if this is due to the strike that's ongoing, that shouldn't interfere in things like emergency matters. It's not quite clear if this is related to COVID. I think it's an understaffing issue mostly. What do you make of this, Tim?
Yeah, no, I mean, the man, Zach, hasn't been given a clear answer as to why his operation keeps getting postponed. It's certainly not a direct result of the strike, just to be clear, because the strike does not impact surgeries, neither emergency nor elective surgeries. However, it does seem to be an issue of understaffing. Sometimes actually did tell them we don't have enough doctors today to perform this operation. And yeah, I mean, it just goes to show how strained our hospital's resources can be. So even for something as critical as breaking an arm, and then you just imagine the situation whereby several medics are forced to go into quarantine, and you realize what an extra burden that places on the hospital's resources, and you kind of understand the frustration felt by doctors at when people don't seem to care about social distancing, right? Because they'll be the ones who will end up having to bear the brunt of it, either by going into quarantine or by getting even more work.
In fact, you said earlier that our hospitals are still in an excellent situation in terms of COVID. We're not heavily strained by the actual numbers of people suffering from the illness in hospitals, but at the same time, every time there is a scare or a contact with someone who's positive, lots of doctors and their families have to go into quarantine. So I guess that is the big strain that people are facing now. Move on to our last story. Go ahead.
Yes, so on a slightly more positive note, Malta has been shortlisted as one of 3 countries and cities to host Europe's largest gay pride event in 2023, so in 3 years' time. This is the Euro Pride Festival, where it's on the calendar of many gay people across Europe, and it's going to come down to Malta, Rotterdam, and Belfast. It's pretty great to see, right? I mean, it's going to be a mass event, a very big mass event. So, but it's going to be in 3 years' time, where hopefully the COVID situation would have, certainly evolved in a more positive way by then. It's great. It's pretty great to see that we are actually planning ahead for a post-COVID future as well, even with events like this to put us on the map.
Yeah, so it must be said that to our tourism, obviously tourism is extremely important to Malta. The pink economy is a big part of tourism, and these festivals bring with them thousands of people who are very happy to spend money in the city. So I think this is an example of how we don't need to rush tourism too much to get to the recovery. We could also do some long-term planning, and this could have a big effect on our economy. And it's, I guess, nice to also dream of a post-COVID reality where mass events are again something we can be very comfortable attending. So that's earmarked for 2023. A decision will be taken on October the 3rd if that is to see if Malta will get there. So that's all we've got for you for today. I've been Chris, and I've been joined by Tim on Lovin Daily. Hope you have a day full of lovin'.